Just a couple of seconds for the participants to join, and then we are ready to kick off. I'm going to turn on my video as well so people can recognize me. Hello. Adrian, Alexei, thank you for being with us. I guess we can kick off. Thank you. Thank you for joining us at our continuous engagement of capacity building at the Sharjah Research and Technology Park. My name is Tariq Salam. I'm part of the business development and the Accelerator team here at the park itself. We do these type of activities on essentially on a weekly and a monthly basis, just so we can continue to engage with stakeholders across the UAE, the region, and on a global perspective. The format of today will be myself, Tariq going through the park's initiatives and what we've been up to over the last 2 years, followed by Adrian, followed by Alexei, and we'll be talking about what they've been up to, what we've been up to, and then we're going to have a quick Q&A session towards the end so we can wrap up the discussions. So to kick it off, the park essentially, you know, the homework has been done for us here in the UAE for the past couple of decades with visionary leaders who have been really paving the way for anything when it comes to innovation. The UAE is an ideal model in every aspect, whether it's in retail, hospitality, whether it's in financial aspect, whether it's in the innovation aspect, or in terms of how to develop emerging market is to get it turning into a developed market. And things have been really made easy for us because the mentality from the top has been always to think for the future, which essentially trickles down to what we're doing here at the park. The park itself is chaired by His Royal Highness Sheikh Dr. Sultan bin Mohammed Al Qasimi, who is the ruler of Sharjah, an academic per se as well. He's been laying out the foundations for the past 2 decades here in Sharjah. And essentially, this is where we stand today as in the evolution of everything that's been happening over the past couple of decades to being, let's say, the catalyst and the accelerator to everything that's been laid out. So we have a few mandates: building an innovation ecosystem. This happens both on a physical and digital perspective. We achieve that by attracting companies who are forward-thinking and innovative, focusing on the areas that we focus on, and by stimulating the creation of ventures, whether it's from the local entrepreneurship side or the universities as well. And naturally, once you do that, we have a trickle down and a byproduct, which is generation of employment, because the more companies that come about or the more companies that are created, the more talent that's required for this to happen. And we heavily support the UAE in transitioning towards a knowledge economy, given, of course, because we are backed by one of the largest talent pools in the region, and obviously invest for the future. In terms of focus areas, these are all mildly similar, but because they're all very interconnected, and these are essentially what is needed for the region itself to develop. And this is things that we're focusing on. So they can be categorized as deep tech in general: water, environmental, renewable, production, architect and design, mobility, logistics, healthcare, digitization. These are all very conservative figures of what the region is going for in terms of an opportunity. And today's speakers are both very heavily involved around the renewable environmental space, which they'll be talking about it more, and which I'm personally very excited about. When we talk about our model, we fit in between the tertiary segments, so the academic, the private, and the government segments, and we sit right in the middle where we try to, or we don't try anymore, we're actually enforcing this on a practical scale, where we're involving various stakeholders across all segments to interact with one another, to collaborate with one another, and to really support the scaling of our partners who joined the park today. So in terms of translation of everything that we've been doing, we already have 6 active deep tech pilots since 2019. And I'll be talking about those as I proceed in this presentation. We've attracted over $100 million in FDI to the park itself, and these are specifically around the projects which are already live. We already have about 125 companies from all over the world across startups, SMEs, and corporates today at the park, actively working from the park. And one of our key USPs is the fact that we're connected to one of the largest talent pools in the region. So we have about 47,000 students, 22 universities in one block. And this is in the Sharjah University city, which is right adjacent to where we are at the RTI Park. A quick landscape of what's going on. We continuously build international relations with various like-minded ecosystems, whether they're research institutes or innovation parks or universities, trade agencies, trade missions, just because it's all about the, let's say, the tech transfer, right? And the bilateral tech transfer, because not only do we support companies and stakeholders to access our ecosystem, we're here to also support them and the vice versa to get into access new markets as well. So this is why it's always important to have these type of relations. One of our flagship projects, which have been kicked off, and this is an R&D phase, when they've already have 3 tracks, which they're testing various technologies, which is around mass transport and logistics transport. But Skyway is a Belarusian technology, and they've got a phenomenal project, which once it's tested and cleared on the park itself, they'll be rolled out into the greater Sharjah and potentially into other Emirates and to scale across the region. We've got various partners around the agri and green technologies. One of the Spanish companies that they're operating, they've already set up a solar R&D center with us at the park. When it comes to capacity building, we have invested in the Sharjah Open, and this is something, an investment which we've done ourselves, which is the Sharjah Open Innovation Lab, which is essentially a fast prototyping lab and a makerspace. As you can see, this is open to the public subscription type of aspect where people can come in and make physical prototypes, which is very important to when we're talking about deep technologies in general, right? You gotta give the public the capacity for them to get into the space in the first place, even if they aren't in it. We have various training sessions and courses where people can come in and create physical products of the likes, whether it's 3D printing, electronics, textiles, manufacturing, metal, CNC, laser, etc. When it comes to universities, we have various, let's say, models that we deal with, specifically with the American University of Sharjah, which is one of the top here in the UAE and in the region. Some of the projects which we have already been very active with in supporting them to commercialize is around the conductive concrete, the 3D printed concrete villa, which is in the middle, and this is currently in the park itself, and around the exoskeleton. And obviously the focus is on IP commercialization, supporting the capital and talent development from the region and such. So we have various initiatives. One is the Middle East Energy Innovation Hub. And this is, again, very focused on supporting the energy and low carbon and oil and gas sectors, because irrespective of the fact that we're transitioning towards new energy, the oil and gas sector is always here to stay for a long, long time, right? So there's a lot of opportunities to tap into so we can make it more efficient and more forward thinking and how we support all our stakeholders to accelerate that. In terms of activations of what we've been doing over the past year, especially during COVID, when everyone was in lockdown, we completely switched to a virtual model, and we were able to engage in a lot of activities. We have our Sharjah Advanced Industry Accelerator, which has just been launched for a second round, where we're accepting applications for all things around the advanced industries, whether it's energy, renewables, construction, manufacturing, production, and this is aligned with the UAE Advanced Technologies, the Ministry of UAE Advanced Industry and Technologies. We have our Middle East and North Africa Innovation Tech Transfer Summit. This is something which we launched in the middle of COVID. We've had over 5,000 participants, and we're coming back again. It was a phenomenal success, and this is, again, a global activation where we're supporting and connected with. We hosted the Mission to Mars team at the time, and they were talking about various things. Even we had speakers from NASA on board. In terms of what we're doing at the park, we're extremely active, from various diplomatic and ministerial visits to launching our own Sharjah Angels network to kind of cater towards the mind of investing in type of activities in deep tech. And we continuously host activations like this, what we're doing in terms of the webinar. We have other things in terms of the Women in Technology Forum, the Future of IT Catalyst, and these are events which have been recently hosted at the park. And we continuously do this from a creative perspective in terms of experiential centers, which is a perfect way to showcase and to run people through what the vision is of certain technologies and certain companies and what they're doing. And again, we're always trying to up and trying to kind of take things to the next level in terms of how we proceed and how we can engage with the general public. So that's it from my side. I hope I didn't take too much from my end. I'm going to leave the floor to Mr. Adrian to introduce himself, obviously, and to also introduce what they've been up to at Recycling Technologies. And I'm personally looking forward to both Adrian and Alexei. Phenomenal companies and phenomenal, let's say, innovators in the field in terms of what's coming next. And there we go, already uploaded. I mean, there we go. So I'll stop on my side. Gentlemen, good luck. And then we will look forward to the conversation at the end of the conversation.
Okay, well, thanks very much, Derek, and great to be with you today. And thanks for inviting us. I'm going to talk about plastic. It's been my life for the last kind of 10 or 11 years. Everybody uses it, everybody loves it. And yet we all appreciate these days that with 40% going to landfill, 25% going to energy from waste, and even worse, 19% ending up in the environment, that's not a sustainable position. And so new tools are required to actually enhance the amount of plastic that is recycled. Mechanical recycling is the mechanism by which some plastics, like bottles, are recycled currently, but we need more. And so if you actually think about the plastic production sort of system, which is rather important to actually just appreciate at this time, you start with the oil and the gas, and in a place like the UAE, you'll know enough about refining and monomer manufacture and then polymer manufacture. And then, of course, you get to the compounder. This is the destination for things like mechanical recycling. As I say, the bottles washed, color sorted, and then flaked, and then back to the compounder for turning back into new products. But that's all very well and good. But when you have multi-layer packaging, or you have contaminated packaging, or you have foil-backed packaging, then you struggle to actually do anything sensible with it from a mechanical recycling perspective. This stuff down the bottom, completely unacceptable, whether we're talking about sky filling and putting carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, or we're putting about material into the landfill, the leakage. Obviously, that needs to be addressed. And so what I want to talk about, a bit about monomer recycling, but mainly feedstock recycling, which are actually the up and coming new generation of chemical recycling, if you like. And so if you're a McKinsey fan, then you could actually see that the plastic is expected to grow to about 1 billion tons by 2050. And since it's actually a much lower carbon footprint than even paper or metal or glass, then I'm very comfortable with that. But as you can see from their expectation, lots of that plastic will come from mechanical recycling or monomer recycling, or there's feedstock recycling. Now, that assumes then that the material which is coming from oil and gas is actually making up the difference. I've taken umbrage with McKinsey. I do it with trepidation, of course. But I personally think that the feedstock recycling can do a little bit more. But when you get down into this area here, you're much more likely to be coming from bio and CO2 derived plastics than I think from oil and gas going forward. And so by 2050, you could well see a decoupling of plastic from oil and gas or fossil material, at least. And so then you end up with a system which actually looks a bit more like this, where a lot more materials going around mechanical recycling, monomer recycling, which is great for things like polystyrene. We're working on 2 plants at the moment in France and in Belgium to actually take polystyrene and turn it back into styrene. And keeping the material at a fairly high value, and therefore back into the polymer manufacture at that stage. And the feedstock recycling is something which I think will actually develop very substantively and actually allow me very contaminated and mixed material to be taken right way back to the refinery stage, when then as it goes back through the system, it can become virgin quality plastic all over again. What does that look like for the UAE? Well, according to the World Bank's report, by 2030, there'll be about 6.8 million tons of waste, and with a 12% of which will be plastic. So you've got about 820,000 tons of plastic per annum. And so the broad kind of split of these could well be that you actually need to develop 400,000 tons of feedstock recycling capacity by 2030, and how exciting that would be. Now, at Recycling Technologies, we envisage that as being done in or using modular machines. And when I say a module, I'm always careful in anywhere that's to do with the oil and gas, because people talk about modules and then you realize they're talking about modules that weigh about 30,000 tons. When I talk about modules, I'm talking about something which is actually in the chassis of a 20-foot isofreight container, and you clip these things together and it creates you a plastic processing machine which does a ton an hour, 7,000 tons a year, converting waste plastic back into oil. And if I just show a photograph, this is a pilot plant that we have running in Swindon in the UK. And so you can see the idea of the 20-foot isofreight container neatly shown here. And so it's an extension of this kind of idea where we're using a fluidized bed reactor into which you push the plastic, and then the plastic actually, fast pyrolysis, actually comes out and then filtered and fractionated through a distillation column here and out into products. And so areas that would be really interesting to talk about collaboration, actually. One of the things that we recognize is that we have a carbon footprint. And you see that here's about 147 kilos of carbon per barrel of oil that we produce, which of course, if you actually compare that to going to energy from waste, is actually presents you a very large saving, because energy from waste produces about 340 kilos of carbon per barrel of oil equivalent. So we're at minus 200 now. But the next generation will actually get us way down to pretty much a zero carbon emission per barrel of oil that we produce. Now, that's a technological development that would be very interesting to have a conversation around as to whether there are collaborative opportunities. The final thing is that we see, and if you look at this little green line here, going up in terms of the number of barrel of oils per day equivalents, then actually this can scale very, very fast by mass production. And so we are actually anticipating setting up manufacturing lines around the world, and we're better than the UAE with the heritage in oil and gas production. It'd be great if that skill set was now able to be turned into that which could actually build recycling capacity for that wonderful material that is plastic. Thank you very much.
Thank you for very much. I lost the mute button and for a second, so I couldn't unmute myself. Really appreciate that, Adrian. That was phenomenal. I got a couple of questions from my side, but I'll leave them towards the end because I'm quite sure that they overlap on both of you, and you both have different perspectives on how this can work. So now I'd like to give the stage to Alexei for his part on Desalinator.
Thank you. There we go. So can you see my screen okay? Great. Okay. Yes. So, hi, everybody, and happy Monday. I'm going to share with you our story at Desalinator. So, you know, we don't think about water, but, you know, I always say water is our most valuable and our most undervalued asset in the world. And right now, it's an industry that really is ripe for disruption. So, you know, we all hear the big figures, but it's difficult to make sense of them. But by 2030, nearly half the world's population won't have reliable access to clean water. And what we've seen is that through COVID, actually nearly 40% of the world's population went into COVID and having issues around access to water. So this really is a pressing issue for our time. Now, in the past, and you'll see this over the UAE, across the Middle East, you know, sustainability and being able to produce water has been a secondary consideration. We have large scale plants powered by fossil fuels, and there's a lot of chemicals that are used in processing. Linking with what Adrian says, these are water is filled in plastic, it's transported in trucks. We have, excuse me, we have complex supply chains, and we're emitting carbon across the supply chain. So at Desalinator, we take a different perspective. We say, what if you can produce water locally at source from water sources like seawater or brackish water sources, 100% from solar energy, where your operational costs are low and where you're not using harmful chemicals? What if you could produce water that is ocean safe and affordable? And that's really what we do. So this is a model of our system. In our system, what we're doing is we're capturing both thermal and electrical energy from the sun. That means that we're getting 4 times more energy that we're capturing and harvesting from the sun, and we're distilling it. And this gives us a lot of advantages because it means that we create very, very pure water. It means that we can run our plant for 24 hours a day from solar. We can tie to the grid, or we can be completely independent of the grid. And our operating cost is very low. And that's really important when you're in areas that are remote, where you don't have access to consumables, to materials, and where you may not have a highly skilled workforce. So this system is designed to be as autonomous as possible. And we can produce in one module 250,000 liters a day of high quality water for less than $1 per cubic meter. Now that's a game changer. So imagine less than $1 for 1,000 liters of high quality water for many places around our world. And typically, you know, traditionally people think about water purely in terms of cost, but more and more now people are understanding the connection between water and climate, that actually water, to all intents, is energy. And the way that we create water is actually a question about how we create energy. So what we're seeing is this shift towards thinking about things like net zero water. But of course, it has to be underpinned by economics. And what we're really proud of is that by using solar, for many parts of the world, we can actually be more economical than traditional fossil fuel solutions. And this can be applied in a number of ways. We have a plant that we're building in Dubai currently, which is for the government, but equally for industries like agriculture. You know, we see during COVID that many countries are looking at their own food security. Well, if you can supply the water and you can solve the energy equation, you can solve your food security equation as well. And then industries like hospitality now, post-COVID, looking at how to create sustainable experiences for their guests that are real, that are meaningful. Well, if you can sort your water question out and you can provide sustainable water for your hotel, then that's a great underpinning for sustainable tourism. And we really look at the entire supply chain when we think about the carbon cost and what we're actually disrupting at Desalinator, because it's not just about the water that you drink, it's about how it's moved, how it's created, and how it's disposed of at the end as well. And actually water underpins so many of the different SDGs. With our project in India, for example, it's very much focused on training women within the town to actually do the distribution of the water. So water can impact livelihood. It can give people back time that they would normally go walking, for example, in many parts of Africa to go and fetch water. And I would say underpins in many ways all of the SDGs. So at Desalinator, we started this journey back in 2013. We built our first product, and you can see down here that we, at a certain point, we got together with the the Dubai Energy and Water Authority, DEWA, and we've very happy to say We're now at the final commissioning stages of our plant in Dubai, which is coming together here, and in fact, which you see behind me in this picture. So this is really exciting because this is the first truly solar thermal desalination system in the world, and we're very excited to be announcing this shortly. We've got a second system that we're building in India. This is going to provide water for an entire town of people in an area where actually they may have to leave because of water in the future because the quality is so poor. So this is really about giving an entire community the resilience that they can pursue their lives in peace and not worrying about water for the future. And we've built various other products. We've got our larger scale system, but we see applications for our technology across a range of products. Very happy to say that we're already engaged very much in the UAE. We're very excited to announce our Dubai plant, and we're also very excited to be a part of the Expo 2020 program. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Alexei. So that was brilliant stuff as well. Again, I was really looking forward to the session because both speakers and some really interesting stuff. So actually, this is something which I've come across every time I engage. So I always engage with startups across the world when it comes to deep technologies, and the biggest issue or the biggest challenge always starts with the funding, especially the ones that are in early stage, right? And the model that we have kind of overcome is, fine, so let's focus on initiating certain pilots, and then that would naturally lead to more scaled approach. Is that a model that you guys have operated with before, or how did it start? Because I know these are very capital intensive technologies to kick off, right? So how do you come about whenever it's a case of, all right, fine, if we can't access the funding, how do we prove the model? How do we prove the technology, showcase the feasibility, the viability, et cetera, and then take it to the next level? We can go by Adrian first, and then Alexei. We'll follow that format for the rest of it.
Okay. Yeah. So I mean, look, absolutely right, Tarek. Funding is the number one thing. It's bizarre, really, that actually in trying to change the story of plastic and being passionate about the technology associated with that, I spend 95% of my time trying to actually raise the funding. And it is about raising a small amount and doing a small thing, and then raising a bit more and trying to get to the next step. But I have to say that actually, actually when you get to the commercial sort of scales and the actual quantum of cash that you actually require to build first of a kind of units is really required. But the funding situation is still not great. Even though you can actually demonstrate the project, you can actually have as many reports as you like, actually people parting with, once you get into the tens of millions kind of category, there's not many people that actually have the vision and have the, what's the word, the passion to actually, put as much on the line as what, the entrepreneurs do for a very long period of time. We've been at this for just over 10 years, and houses on the line, careers on the line, absolutely everything on the line. But to actually get people with cash to actually part with it, to accelerate it, because the rate of progress is fundamentally not about technology, it's about access to cash.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't echo Adrian more. I mean, absolutely agree. This is a world where the funding system and the funds that are available to build up new technologies, I mean, is really very, very thin on the ground. A lot of the money that we see at the early stage flows into apps or sensors and things like this. So, who is funding the kind of systems that are going to solve the global challenges and the green industrial technologies for the future? And our experience very much rings true with Adrian, that it's extremely thin on the ground, and actually the amount of energy that an entrepreneur puts in is not commensurate with the risk is not commensurate with the funding community that's out there. But I think that represents an opportunity. I think that you are seeing that certain governments are taking a more forward-looking position. And it really, I think, is in many ways, the role of government to create an ecosystem and the kind of serious vision to support these kind of global, these technologies that can really have global impact. So I think that is an opportunity, and certainly in Dubai, we particularly have found a very innovative, very open environment to create and de-risk these early stages of technologies.
Very well said, thank you. So what is it, do you think, that is kind of needed to accelerate this further? Is it something around the policy aspect? Is it something around further education? Or is it just the, I mean, you mentioned there is no sense of urgency, right? From these, let's say, investors or companies that have this type of capacity to get into this field. Because what we're trying to do here is always this exact type of communication, right? This type of relaying the message and bringing people together, so understanding what are the needs that are missing and how can we explore these type of pockets of opportunities. So do you think it's, or is, I think at the end of the day, I know what the answer is going to be, it's always going to be a mixture of everything, but what do you think is the biggest priority today, given that we know there's a lot of challenges from supply chain to the energy consumption, to the production of plastic, which kind of accelerated quite a lot recently just because of the disposables, whether they're masks or gloves or, you know, anything along those fast. This is specifically catered to Adrian.
Yeah, so I think that everybody has a part to play, and in a funny little way, actually the power basis here has actually moved from industries to people. So people and social media can now make their voices heard. And so from a plastics perspective, you know, the pivotal point in our journey has actually been that you know, people have said, right, you know, plastic in the ocean is dreadful, enough and no more. And that has garnered a movement, if you like, a popularist-led movement, which has meant that, you know, some of the petrochemical companies have actually had to start to take this thing seriously, because otherwise they're going to see the use of plastic in significant decline. And it's also made policymakers actually have to take things seriously. And so, you know, people started queuing up to legislate. Now, what's interesting, though, is then the amount of, I would frankly call it greenwashing that then goes on. So the legislators make some rules and say, right, we've done that, on to the next crisis. The petrochemical companies actually put together, you know, some funds and start doing some minor projects and all the rest of it. But meanwhile, the investment into new plastic production actually carries on at an enormous scale. So in the time that I've been doing this, global plastic production has gone from 250 million tons to about 358 million tons. So, you know, that's 118 million tons of new capacity, probably at the scale of somewhere between $5 and $7 billion per million tons. So the world has spent between $600 billion and $1 trillion on new plastic production. The amount that's been spent on recycling, not a thousandth of it. And so it's good to see that consumer can put the pressure on, but actually I still think that some of the bigger companies actually need to look in the mirror a little bit and actually say, okay, you know, the scale of investments here are going to be similar to the scale of investments in plastic production. It's not logical to think you can go from oil into plastic, and that costs you X per ton, and then to go from plastic back into oil is going to cost you 1,000th of that. You know, intuitively, that doesn't make any sense. And so, you know, there has to be some honesty in the debate here, and people have to actually start writing some proper checks so that people can actually move much more quickly.
Yeah. And I would echo that. I mean, I think for me also, there's a really, it starts with having a genuine vision. I think that we tend to see the future in a kind of incremental step as incremental steps of the past. And that means you think incrementally about the future. So how can we improve things by a little bit within the current constraints that we have? But actually, when you look at technologies like Desalinate or like Adrian's recycling technologies, what these are actually technologies that can disrupt an entire system. If you put a desalinator system in a place that doesn't have access to reliable water, you change the game. You're not doing an incremental step. you change the way that you provide water to people, that you give resilience to communities or businesses, and you do it in a way that's in harmony with our planet and with our oceans. If you're able to recycle plastics, you can actually have a supply chain that is optimized to reduce carbon over time. So it's a system thinking. It's a different way of thinking about an entire system that is not incremental. And at the moment, what you're seeing is that there's governments that are starting to understand this and starting to say, well, hang on a minute, let's start from first principles. What would it look like to really evolve our supply chain for water, for food, for plastics, for energy, and actually to realize that this is a way not only to create a more sustainable planet, but it's also a way to show real leadership in a world where we're looking at probably the largest market over the next 20 years is going to be around sustainability.
Incredibly well put, gentlemen. Thank you so much for those inputs. Those are quite insightful. If I were to ask you, over the next coming 1 to 2, maybe 3 years, what are you most excited about in terms of maybe what you're working on or what's coming next for your respective startups or companies? What are you most excited about and looking forward to?
Yeah, I think that for us, it's actually, it sounded like I was negative about the funding, and you know, I do have a slightly jaundiced view about the funding and how long it takes big companies to get moving. But I am optimistic about the fact that some big companies are beginning to move, and I'm optimistic about the fact that some bigger checks will get cut, which will allow things to actually speed up, because 95% of all plastic in production today is recyclable. But the capacity for recycling it is just woeful. And so people have the technology, and people have shown these technologies over the last kind of 15, 20 years, right? But finally, I think that there's a moment that's here to be able to actually say, okay, we are going to scale this up, and we are going to roll this out, and we're going to make recycling catch back up with production. And what a joy that would be if we can actually sort of turn the tide on plastic in the ocean. And do it in a way which is sustainable. But look, burning plastic in an energy from waste kind of facility clearly emits an enormous amount of CO2. So unless you've got carbon capture on the back end of it, you've replaced landfilling with sky filling. And the impact of that on the oceans is probably even greater than the physical plastic in the ocean, because of the acidification. And so the opportunity to actually say, right, here's a truly low carbon, sustainable way of keeping this material going around in a virtuous circle is super, super exciting. And I'm excited that, some big companies are beginning to get it, and the muscle for actually getting stuff done is finally coming to fruition, we hope.
Yeah, I guess for us, I think I share some optimism. I think that we've had this awful COVID situation, but maybe one silver lining is that it's helped people think in a more global way, and to realize that actually, if we do come together, we can solve some of our most intractable global problems. And to our mind, it starts with water. If there's no water, you're not going to be able to do anything. And really, I think we're very happy that there's some organizations that get this. We found in DEWA really an organization that's willing to invest in innovation and to really put their money where their mouth is. We're really proud to work with them. And then organizations like Carlsberg as well, who, really have a genuine philosophy and really care about being sustainable. And they have a slogan, "Together Towards Zero." And really, we feel that that's a great starting point, is when people really, organizations, governments, really see this not only as something that has to be done, but actually an opportunity for leadership. I think that's really exciting. And for us, look, this year we'll be announcing soon this plant behind me in Dubai. We're very excited to share that with the world. And a little bit later this year, we're going to have COP26 in the UK, and hopefully that'll be a catalyst for more focus and more investment into the space. But yeah, I think there's with the excitement, it's tempered by also a lot of the realities that Adrian's also talked about. And I think it's really, these kind of forums are great to share this sort of message. And really, we're always interested in connecting with people who have a genuine vision, realize that there's an opportunity in these kind of spaces, and want to do something about it. So, yeah.
What's interesting though is to how do we actually, as a society, actually make these things go much more quickly? So if you think about photovoltaics, people were doing photovoltaics in the end of the 70s, but it's and I was absolutely thrilled to see that Dubai just done a contract for a photovoltaic farm for less than $10 per megawatt hour. I mean, that's fantastic. That's what an achievement. But why has it had to take 50 years to actually get down that cost curve? And so wind farms. There was a point in time, I remember clearly people saying if wind was going to become a major source of electricity, then it had been done by now. We've had windmills for centuries. Now nobody's saying that anymore, because actually, it's finally got there and it's got to scale. And actually, COVID might actually be one of those things which actually says, okay, if you can actually take a 10-year vaccine creation program and take it down to 10 months, where's the magic formula in there? And what's really interesting is it wasn't the big companies that did this, right? So you've got Oxford with a small team, but they had a massive scale-up partner in AstraZeneca. You had BioNTech and a massive scale-up partner in Pfizer. And so, it does make me wonder really whether structurally to bring some of these clean tech things through, if that model can't actually, you've got Desalinator, little company, innovative, fast moving, prepare to take risks, but who's really the scale-up partner? Recycling technologies, you've got a group of people with masses of ideas about how to solve the whole global plastics problem. But you need these, big companies coming in alongside and sort of saying, right, small company, you just throw cash at it, go really fast, and then bang, structurally you put a big scalar partner in there. And if we thought about, clean tech in the same way as people have thought about the vaccine program, I think actually we could actually take these 50-year cycles and shrink them down a long way.
And it's such a commercial opportunity as well. I mean, look at the companies who are making vaccines. I mean, they got pre-orders from governments all over the world. They were able to build the vaccines against those orders, which meant they were able to scale up, and capital was not an issue. What if we did the same thing for global hunger? Global water provisioning, solving our plastics issues for the sea. Adrian's right. These are solvable, and you're not talking about decades with the right motivation. These things can actually be addressed much earlier. The key thing is having a vision, and then really having leadership that puts money where its mouth is, behind a vision. And I think I'm also excited that we're seeing tentative movements in that direction.
Really incredible insights from the both of you. I really appreciate that. I mean, going to a point that you mentioned earlier, Adrian, about speaking relatively negatively about the funding, I think that's purely from the passion, and this is exactly what we need to foster these type of conversations, because it has to kind of drive towards that. And really phenomenal stuff, what you're both working on. And actually, back to your point, Adrian, about finding these scale-up partners, this is what we've been focusing on here at the park, because we understand what it takes to really get, and we know the complexity to do this. And this is why the companies that join us here, they've been, now we have about 125, let's say, success stories. There was a question from the audience to you specifically, Adrian, about what is the temperature needed to recycle this plastics?
Yeah, so the pyrolysis is usually done somewhere between 460 and 500 degrees. And obviously absence of oxygen, so there's no combustion. It's a thermal cracking kind of process. When you're doing the polystyrene, it tends to be a little bit higher, but it's that sort of range.
Thank you. I hope that was a question from the audience, and it was a bit more technical, so I can't really imagine. But I'm pretty sure that's quite hot. back to the point about DEWA in terms of how much of a forward-thinking government entity they are and how the different initiatives that they've been doing. And this is across the entire UAE. Here in Sharjah, we have BIA. BIA are one of the leading champions when it comes to this regard. And this is a beautiful story when it comes to how they first started to where they are today. Now they're cross-region. And they recently announced an incredible project around the hydrogen, the green hydrogen aspect. And a lot of things are coming, yet a lot of challenges are as well. And this is why we invite all the companies that are operating in this space to kind of interact with us, engage with us, to see how we can support them to grow, how we can support them to scale, to access finance, because at the end of the day, we grow by our partners, right? So this is how things are working. So I will take this opportunity to end the session. And thank you, gentlemen. Adrian, Alexei, thank you so much for your insights. Thank you so much for your time as well. For the participants and the attendees, thank you so much for tuning in. We will be reaching out as well to see how we can further collaborate and hopefully follow up to this webinar in the near future with actual projects and actual success stories and how we supported you guys to grow. So thank you once again. And
thanks very much for having us.
Ciao. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Bye-bye.